System testing is one of the most important parts of any sort of digital transformation or ERP implementation. But what exactly is system testing and how does it work? That's what I want to talk about here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And one of the services we provide our clients is helping them with implementation. As part of helping them with their implementations, we're also helping with system testing. And system testing is one of the most crucial foundational parts of an implementation that affects a lot of other aspects of a digital transformation. So what I want to do today is talk about what system testing is, and more importantly, talk about how it works and how it can align with and influence other parts of your transformation to make it successful. Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to share a little bit of information about Third Stage Consulting and who we are. Third Stage Consulting Group is an independent technology agnostic provider of consulting services to help clients through their digital transformations. We help with digital strategy and software selection, as well as implementation planning. And during implementation, we provide services related to program management, organizational change, business process improvement, as well as enterprise architecture. These are just some of the services we provide. We have offices in North America as well as Europe and Asia Pacific. So if you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to check out our resource center, which includes a number of resources that will help you through your digital transformation, and you can access that for free using the QR code here or the links below. You can also reach out to me directly if you'd like to discuss your digital transformation and brainstorm ideas on how to improve where you're headed on your journey. Now let's jump back into today's content. Before we dive into how system testing works and how it can influence and affect other parts of your transformation, it helps to first back up and talk about what exactly is system testing. And system testing is exactly what it sounds like. It's a way of testing a system to make sure that it meets your business process needs and your business requirements. However, it's a lot more nuanced than that. There's a lot of different layers of testing. You have the testing of the software functionality itself, and that oftentimes in the past has been referred to as unit testing. So you're testing to make sure that the configurations and the customizations you've developed are working, that the technical bugs are glitch-free, and that you've worked through the technical aspects of the implementation. But that's just one layer. The software testing is just one layer. On top of software testing, you also have integration testing. And that's where you start to test not only the software itself, but anything that the system might integrate with. If you have other third-party systems or legacy systems that you're going to tie onto or tie into the core ERP system or the core system you're deploying, you also want to test to make sure that the integrations and the data flows between your different systems are working. And then the third layer, the third major layer of testing, is user acceptance testing, or sometimes it's also referred to as conference room pilots. So this is where you're looking at things more from a business perspective, to not just make sure that the software works from a technical perspective, and not just to make sure that the software integrates well, but that it works for your business. And you can make a strong argument that user acceptance testing is the most important part of testing. And the reason for that is because if the software works well technically but doesn't align with your business or doesn't fit your business needs, doesn't address your business requirements, then the software really doesn't work. Even though technically it does, it's not going to work for your business. There's also a number of other downstream impacts that can benefit from user acceptance testing, and I'm going to talk about that more throughout this video. But in general, it's important to understand that you have system or unit testing, you have integration testing, and then you have user acceptance testing. Those are the three major phases. And within each of those three phases of testing, generally you're going to go through multiple iterations. So you're not just going to test once, you're going to test multiple times, because every time you go through the test cycle, you're going to discover new things. You're going to find things that aren't quite working the way you thought they would. You're going to need time to remediate and then retest. So the more you can spend going through multiple iterations, the more likely it is you're going to address any of the risks and deficiencies of the software and the processes that you're deploying, and the more likely it is that you're going to end up with a system that delivers business value and a system that is less likely to cause a negative operational disruption at the time of go live. So let's dive into the first phase of testing, which is the system or the unit testing that I mentioned before. And this is that technical focus on the testing cycle. This is where you're making sure that the way the software has been configured and customized, you're making sure that the software can do what you intended to do. And this is generally more of the technical side of the testing, and as you go through multiple iterations, as you move to the other two phases of testing, you're generally moving towards more of the business testing side of things. But to start, we have to make sure that the core fundamental aspects of the software is working the way it was designed and the way it was intended. So this is where we look at the way we've defined our business processes and our business requirements, the way we've designed the software. We look at, does the software do what we intended to do now that we've configured the software and customized, in some cases, some of the functionality. So this phase is an important first phase, but what you don't want to do is stop at this phase. So in other words, you don't want to just stop because now technically the software is working. Let's assume you've worked out all the bugs, the configurations work, the customizations work. That's only one step in the process. We now have to make sure that the system integrates with other systems, and most importantly, we want to make sure that the system can be used by the business and delivered in a way that actually delivers business value. So this is the first step, but what we're going to talk about next are the other two steps, which are arguably even more important than this first phase of testing. So once we know that the system works from a technical perspective, all the individual modules and workflows are configured the way we wanted, we from a technical perspective believe that the software is bug-free and working the way we intended it to. Now we move into the phase of looking at, well, let's make sure that the system can integrate with other systems. And there's actually a couple different layers here, a couple nuances of system integration testing. One is looking at how does the software integrate with modules within the core ERP system. So for example, if you're deploying SAP S/4HANA, you're going to have different modules within S/4HANA that do different things. You have inventory management, you have financials, you have human capital management. You have all these different modules that have completely different purposes, and you need to make sure all those modules tie together even though it's part of the same system. And that's true for most enterprise technologies, not just SAP, but whether it's Microsoft or Oracle or Workday, Epicor, Infor, any of those ERP systems, you're going to want to make sure that the modules integrate with one another and that the processes and the data flows between those modules. However, you also want to look at how the software integrates with other systems. So chances are pretty high that you're not just going to implement one single ERP system. You're probably going to have at least one or more other systems that you have to keep for regulatory purposes, for legacy purposes because your core ERP system can't handle what those legacy systems could do. Or perhaps it's part of your interim decommissioning strategy, is you aren't going to get rid of all your old systems on day one of go live, so you need to figure out how you're going to integrate your core system with some of the other systems. So integration testing looks at how the software is going to talk to other systems and how it's going to pass data back and forth, and you're really trying to expose any problems or challenges that go along with that. And this is important because not all systems talk well to one another. There's a lot of APIs and integration points that need to be built, and those integration points don't always work the way you intend them to. So we can't just look at testing the software in isolation. Now we have to look at testing the software across modules and across different systems as well to ensure that when we look at end-to-end functionality and processes within those systems, the software is doing what we intended it to do. Now, the final major phase of testing is the most important in my opinion, and that is user acceptance testing. And I'm going to come back to why it's so important and what some of the downstream implications are, but let's just start by describing what it is in a little bit more detail. User acceptance testing is where you move away from IT testing software to make sure that the software is working from a technical perspective. Now you start to involve business users. So frontline employees, non-technical people that are actually going to use the software day to day. They're coming in and they're testing to see how the software works and to make sure that it works to support their business from an operational perspective. So by this point, we assume that the technology works. And when I say it works, I mean technically it works, the bugs are worked out, customization works, configuration works, the integration works, the data is flowing between systems, all that stuff. Now we need to make sure that it's working for the business. And this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where we're trying to bridge the gap between the software we've built and the business that we're trying to build for the future. And those two things aren't always in sync. A lot of times the technical people might misunderstand what it is that the business needs. It could be that the business people don't understand how the software works or how it should or could support their business going forward. So there's a lot of reconciliation that needs to happen when you get through user acceptance testing. And that's why it's so important to spend a lot of time on user acceptance testing. And part of the problem is user acceptance testing is generally last in the testing cycle, and sometimes it gets compressed because you're coming up on a go-live date or a deadline. And if you spend a lot of time in the first two cycles of testing with the system testing and the integration testing, a lot of times you don't leave enough time for user acceptance testing, and that gets compressed or cut short. And that's a really bad idea because the less time you spend on user acceptance testing, the more likely it is you're going to miss something. There's some sort of exception or some sort of major part of your business that you didn't plan for, you didn't test. And that's why these business scenarios that you lay out in testing is so important. You're not going to be able to test every single possible variation of a business process, but you do want to make sure that you've covered at least 80% or more of how you're going to run your business using the technology, and you want to make sure that your users are comfortable that the software is going to meet the needs of your organization. So from a business acceptance perspective and a business value perspective and an operational risk management perspective, user acceptance testing is hugely important. In fact, so important that there's other downstream impacts and downstream benefits that I'm going to talk about next as it relates to user acceptance testing. In addition to testing to make sure the software meets your business needs, user acceptance testing and just the overall test cycle in general is a great way to help people learn the new system. It's part of the training mechanism that you can use to get people to get comfortable with the system. And it's also a way to make sure that you've identified where the impacts to the organization are be. And it also helps us identify what the impacts to the organization are going to be. So let's give a quick example here. If you have a small subset of people that are customer service reps, and you're not going to have every single customer service rep do their user acceptance testing, but you're going to have a subset of customer service reps that'll come in from a business perspective, test the software, get comfortable with it, and part of what they're going to do is define what it is that is different about their jobs in the new system. And this is hugely important from a change management and training perspective, because now these business users, these subject matter experts, are able to help inform us how their job is going to change in the new system, and it allows us to now communicate that and work with the rest of the customer service group to ensure they understand how the jobs are changing, so that by the time we get to training, they're not surprised by it. When we do end user training later on, we've already communicated what the changes are, we've given them a preview of how their jobs will change, we've given them a preview of how their business processes are going to change, new capabilities that the software offers them that they don't have today that are going to make their jobs easier, presumably. So all these different things we can be identifying, we should be identifying during user acceptance testing. In fact, one of the most powerful things you could do is make sure that your change management team is involved in user acceptance testing, because they need to understand too how jobs are going to change. And the only way they can really fully understand how jobs are going to change is by working with those frontline users that are involved in the testing cycles to identify what those impacts are. So from a change impact perspective, from an operational perspective, and from a training perspective, user acceptance testing has a huge amount of impact that extends well beyond just testing the software to make sure it works for your business. So when we're defining a test plan for our digital transformation or our ERP implementation, we want to make sure we have a very robust test plan. We first of all want to make sure we've addressed adequately all three of these different phases of testing: the system testing, integration testing, user acceptance testing. And a general rule of thumb would be that you want to do at least 3 rounds and 3 iterations within each of those 3 phases. So right there, you're talking about potentially 9 or more different iterations of test cycles. And as part of that test cycle, you're going to leave room for remediation and fixes to what's been uncovered during testing. And then you're going to leave time to redo the testing and go through the next iteration. So whatever you do, you want to make sure you have enough iterations of testing throughout. And in particular, you want to make sure you have plenty of time for user acceptance testing toward the end of the testing cycle. Because again, if you skimp on that, it doesn't matter that you tested everything else and that the software works, the integration works. That doesn't matter if it's not working for your business and you haven't gone through that user acceptance testing. Now, one thing you want to make sure, of course, is that you don't allow people just to resist change as part of the user acceptance testing. A lot of times people will freak out or they'll start to panic because they see that the software is so different, or they obsess about every single little thing that's going to be different about the new system. And that's okay, that's part of the process. But you want to make sure that you're capturing those things and using it constructively rather than using it as an excuse to push back on the changes. So when we define those test plans, we want to make sure we have enough iterations throughout each of the phases of testing. And we also want to make sure that we assign resources that allow us to do some of the other things that allow us to benefit from the testing cycle. In particular, the change impacts, the training, and identifying what the new processes are going to look like. Those are all things that can be very important outputs and deliverables from your testing cycle, but you need to make sure you have resources and time allocated for that. So I hope this has provided you an overview and understanding of how testing fits into an overall digital transformation, both from a technical perspective and more importantly from an operational and organizational perspective. If you'd like to learn more about digital transformation best practices, I encourage you to read our 2024 Digital Transformation Report. It's a report we publish each year that contains a number of best practices and tips to make your project more successful. as well as a number of independent reviews and rankings of different technologies in the marketplace. So you can find that by scanning the QR code right here, or you can go to the links below. So I hope you found this information useful, and hope you have a great day. Of other positive, nope. So integration testing looks at how there's also a number of other positive, I said the same thing.
Same thing.
So yep.
Yep.